Cycling down Main Street in Manayunk, you could be forgiven for not knowing the history that runs down these unsuspecting Philadelphia streets. Take a right turn on Levering, weather the cobbles under the elevated railway on Crescent, and take another left and head way, way up, and you start to get the idea. In the first years of the 1980s, this place, Manayunk, still foundered in a post-industrial Rust Belt slump, a new sport was taking off in the U.S. Cycling. A sport almost uniquely defined by its heritage had virtually none here in the United States. Some heritage needed to be made. 3 men, Symes, Chauner, Casal, they agreed and would work to build it. The story that would unfold over the next 30-plus years is complicated. It's a story of a rising new sport, and a story of politics and ambition, of dreams never fully realized. And it's a story of an unexpected celebration of sport and place. This is the Philadelphia International Cycling Classic. The foundation of the race would primarily be a local affair. Chauner and Casal were both from Philly itself, and Symes, the most far-flung of the trio, had his origins in North New Jersey. But while the roots of this beginning were all-American and sometimes intensely local, the road to Philadelphia started in earnest far from these streets. I spoke to Jack Symes III, one of those 3 key figures, and the son and grandson of American cycling royalty.
That was sort of in the modern golden age of bike racing in the United States, when things were really happening.
In 1984, the UCI World Championships took place in Barcelona. Symes, head of U.S. cycling, was there.
We were at the World Championships in 1984, which were in Barcelona. Casal was the mechanic for the U.S. Pro World Team, and Dave was there, and I was in charge of U.S. Pro, so I was there as well. We put this thing together on how we were going to do it and how we were going to start the course and so forth. I believe we were riding on a bus, going from one location to the next on a UCI bus.
Dave Chauner was another of those 3 founders. I spoke to him as well.
And we decided that what the sport needed back in 1983-84 was an official road race championship, UCI standards and nationally recognized. So we thought, let's do one in Philadelphia.
It would be a race in Philadelphia, America's founding city, a fitting locale for such an event. But it was missing something that defines any cycling race. A place to climb. That search for a climb to add drama and break up the race would bring organizers northwest of Philadelphia's center, to Manayunk. The story of Manayunk is the story of a river and a place. The Schuylkill River that passes right by powered the mills that were the defining industry of the neighborhood, and it boomed through the U.S. Civil War, supplying the United States' army with clothes and blankets. But after the 1940s, after 80 years of success, like a lot of similar places, the country it had once served proudly left it behind. The mill buildings lay silent, but long before any mill had churned out any textile, the river carved the land itself here into a steep, but negotiable hill. The river valley separated different areas of the metro, and by chance, the path between two of this race's main characters ran into and out of this valley.
And I had grown up in Rosemont and used to go up to Chestnut Hill where Jerry Cassell's shop was, and I'd always drive up through Manayunk and thought, wow, this is a really cool place because it's just like Europe, it's kind of the windy streets and steep hill.
It was the perfect place for the race to climb. With that, the course would be set, centering around the Schuylkill River and the Manayunk Wall, as it would come to be known. 1 year after those pivotal bus rides in Barcelona, in 1985, the race ran as the Core States U.S. Pro Championships. It would be an international affair. Top teams from all around the globe would come to compete, but with a little wrinkle. The first American to cross the line in Philly would be national champion. That was enough to launch this race into the stratosphere. We can see it from its very first winner, an athlete named Eric Heiden.
And the best thing that could ever happen to us was that Eric Heiden won the first race. And Eric Heiden was, as you probably know, was a famous speed skating Olympian. I think he won 5 Olympic gold medals, and he was kind of the golden boy of the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid. And he'd converted to cycling after that and had been racing with the 7-Eleven team. And the fact that he won was incredible. And we actually had convinced Sports Illustrated to come down. And he came and wrote a 2 or 3 page article in Sports Illustrated about this incredible event. And that's what kicked it off.
The course itself also made an impression. Although the riders started and finished on the Parkway in Center City, the most notable section of the race was the climb in Manayunk. The wall would become famous for its inclusion in the event, and it was an immediate fan favorite.
I mean, I've been to a lot of races and world championships, and to see that in America, it gave you goosebumps. When you went up, I mean, it was just like incredible noise going up the wall. Yeah. People just cheering, and there were sections where the people could come out close to the riders and stuff. It was just a great atmosphere. It was super exciting. Mm-hmm. The way professional bike racing should be in the United States.
It was, it was a party. It was a huge scene, and the wall was really epicenter of it all. And I guess late in the 90s, I started going, because why wouldn't you? I mean, it was this amazing scene. The wall was packed with people. It was lined 3 or 4 deep. There were, it was huge press coverage. There were 3 or 4 helicopters overhead, always, tracking the whole race all the way through.
But when you got to the wall, it was massive from the trestle where they first came up the wall all the way up to the top, which is about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile. It was literally 10, 15 deep.
With the race serving as the national championships, the most talented U.S. riders always showed up to Philly, and it also attracted international greats. Laurent Jalabert, before he became a Tour de France legend, raced these streets. In 1993, a young rider by the name of Lance Armstrong would win the race. Armstrong was the first one to use the wall as a decisive attacking point to launch a win. Armstrong has a role to play too in this story, ultimately going beyond his own career entirely, beyond what anybody could have known, the day he blazed up that hill in Manayunk. In 1994, we see the emergence of an equivalent women's race held on the same day and on the same course, the Liberty Classic. In 1995, the second Liberty Classic ever held came around Logan Circle in a bunch. It was anyone's go, with under a kilometer left.
You can see the dark sky here, but the sun is shining directly below us right now, and they're going to have a dry run to the finish, I'm sure of that. But they've managed to split the field into two groups, and now the opportunists will come. If they hesitate, they will lose, and this is Clary Hughes. I've just told you this girl from Canada is a real rider. She attacks something terrific, and she can win alone. She has the strength. This is a super gap. This young lady rode for the national Canadian team. She joined Team Saturn, and she is going to land the biggest race of her career. If she could just hang on, the sprinters are winding up now. It's a long, long way along the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, and now our cameras, they close the gap a little bit from the head on, but she's going to hang and she's going to die. She's done it. She's got it right on the line, and the sprinters are robbed on the day.
The first across the line was Clara Hughes, a Canadian, with an improbable and life-affirming story. 1 year after her win on the streets of Philly, she won 2 cycling bronze medals at the Atlanta Olympics, then took the same path as Eric Heiden, just in reverse. She quit cycling, then won gold in the 5,000 meters speed skating in Torino 2006 amid battles with depression, in the process becoming an outspoken figure on mental health in sport. Hughes' win points to an interesting theme of the Liberty Classic, that it was in some ways an inverse of the Core States Championship. The first winner of the Core States race was an Olympic champion speed skater turned cyclist. The second winner of the Liberty Classic was a cyclist who would later turn an Olympic champion speed skater. In the Core States Classic, Americans won more often than not, while in the Liberty Classic, there was never an American winner. And while a couple racers won multiple U.S. road titles on Philadelphia streets, no one ever won the original iteration of the race outright more than once. In the Liberty Classic, it was a different story. The third year of the Liberty Classic, 1996, Petra Rössner of Germany came across the line first. After winning a track cycling gold medal at Barcelona in 1992, she would move to road cycling and win the Liberty Classic an astounding 7 times out of 8 appearances in the event, the greatest cyclist of the Philadelphia races and part of her impressive career. Rössner's legendary career in Philadelphia made her an icon on the Parkway, staking a claim to these streets like few cyclists have ever done for any place, not just Philly. Perhaps the German 7 victories spoke to a sort of mixed Euro-American flavor that the event seemed to take on. I had the chance to talk to Kiel Reinen, who won races in Philadelphia in 2013 and 14, and he told me of the experience of being a racer on these streets.
And Philly really felt like a European race that was being hosted in America as opposed to an American-style race. But it also had some American flair to it, which was, I think, what made it such an appealing race. It had a little bit of both, and that made it really cool. So we spend so much of our career racing on their turf, right? No matter where we're racing over there, it's always going to be a little uncomfortable, a little bit foreign, a little unfamiliar. Whereas those European races are really in their comfort zone. A lot of them are racing really close to home, and they've done those races since they were a kid. And so there's this familiarity and this comfort level that we just, as Americans doing a European sport, we just don't get to experience very often. But at the same time, Philly had sort of the prestige and the attraction of a bigger European race. So they were getting big names to come over for those races, and it legitimized it. It made it feel like, okay, we've got a hometown race that, we've got the home court advantage, but it's still an important race.
Philadelphia attained then this odd mixed character, a sport so intensely geographical, so dependent on place, in some senses here out of place, a primarily European pursuit not quite at home on these strikingly wide American roads. These races were a lot of things, really. It was a strange national champion decider. It was a race of attrition. It was the most prestigious one-day race the United States had ever seen. And the city truly made it its own. People turned up in droves to spectate a thrilling event, and to just get out and be in community. And in that, the wall stands out as the spectator's heart of the course.
Parties all down that street, and like you want to be everywhere, right? You want to sit in the same place and be at a party, but you also want to walk around and see other parties and see people. So it was a beautiful metaphor for the human, at least in Manayunk, it was a beautiful metaphor for the human experience. There's so much joy to be had all over.
I got on my bike and I moved around, but of course the primo place was right here. And people were always festive and pulled together. Neighborhoods pulled together. Yep. They had their own.
One of the other kind of special things about the race for me was that the fans weren't just cycling fans. You know, because it went through Manayunk neighborhood, it attracted a bunch of people who would not have otherwise shown up to a bike race, and somehow that made it even better. Like the fact that a lot of people out there cheering were not out there cheering specifically for a bike race, they were just cheering in general, made it even cooler.
We were always at the Manayunk Wall. It was a festive atmosphere, and that was definitely a great draw.
This is the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. It was the site of the start and finish lines for most of the Philadelphia races. It's where Petra Rossner, a sprinter by trade, was more comfortable, and where she took all of her 7 victories here in Philadelphia. This grand American boulevard was a product of pre-World War I American optimism. The urban planners imagined this great wide American thoroughfare surrounded by museums and trees, an answer to Paris's famous Champs-Élysées. And there's more than a little bit of irony in that comparison. The Champs-Élysées has been the beating heart of modern bike racing for 50 years, marking the finish of the Tour de France. Hosting the finish of the Philadelphia race, perhaps the Parkway would become a similar American cycling mecca. The Parkway's claim to cycling fame was always tenuous at best, though. Even while the races were still going, it's so multi-purpose. It holds concerts, political rallies, everything you can imagine in a city. It could never symbolize just cycling on its own. If you want an iconic bike racing spot, the Wall stands out. This offbeat steep section in a deindustrialized textile milling section of Philadelphia was a half-mile long, 250-foot high party every single year. If the Parkway represented the grand ambition of the race and U.S. cycling as a whole, this place was the people's hillside. It gave Manayunk and Philadelphia a chance to show who it was. It was raucous, it was crazy, it was messy, it was joyful, and it had a community.
But among the folks who were here, extremely positive. Just big core memories for people that were kids at the time, seeing the race. A lot of people, it was a social gathering that was honestly less about the race itself and more about the fact that there was just something to do together.
Lance Armstrong, who raced up the Manayunk Wall and won the U.S. Road Cycling Championships at the finish line on the Parkway in 1993, would become world champion on the road in the same year as his Philadelphia win, then would survive cancer and go on to win 7 straight Tours de France, in the process bringing the sport of cycling to unprecedented popularity in the USA. The dream in the early 2000s was that this strange European sport would break out into the U.S. mainstream, that Lance Armstrong's breakthrough success would bring the sport to the fore in the United States as it never had done before. The Manayunk Wall would be the United States' Mordui, and just like all those city planners imagined years ago, the Parkway would be our Champs-Élysées. But of course, it didn't turn out like that. In 2005, Chris Wary won the U.S. Road Cycling Championship by being the first American across the line in Philadelphia, also winning the race outright. The next year, with the 20-year contract of Philadelphia as a championship decider expired, the road championships would be held in Greenville, South Carolina, and would be an exclusively American race, in line with the practice among more traditional cycling nations. From there, the Philadelphia race would go losing its prestige. In no insignificant way, U.S. cycling's bid for a more legitimate national road championship kind of kneecapped the Philadelphia race, with its unorthodox way of crowning American champions. Without the national championship draw, all the difficulty of holding such events, especially in Philadelphia, came to the fore. Jerry Casale and Dave Trauner, the legends who had in large part gotten the race off the ground, ran into trouble getting sponsorships. The race rotated through a shifting selection of local banks and promoters who didn't see the value of the race in the same way that core states had in the 80s and 90s. Of course, the last years of the 2000s were not a particularly great time for banks as a whole either. It was also in this time that Jerry Casale had to step back from organizing the race.
And then Jerry, who was my partner, and Jerry was the man of the hour. I mean, he could really work with the police and the city services. He was a technical guy. We worked together really well. I mean, we were like brothers, and he was with me for 25 years, and we'd done races all over the country together. After Philly, we'd gone out to West Virginia and Pittsburgh and Atlanta and Minneapolis and everything. And Jerry was always in charge of the technical crews, and so he got prostate cancer and ended up having a couple of really tough years. And then he eventually couldn't really work anymore. In fact, he died shortly. He died in 2012. And that was the last year of the race.
In 2013, Dave Trauner, the last of the three original organizers involved with the race, couldn't come up with the sponsorship dollars to keep the event on its feet. The Philadelphia race of 2013 was announced to be canceled. Ironically, it was just 4 days after Lance Armstrong announced to the world that he had taken drugs and had his wins stripped from him, including his win in Philadelphia. But that early 2013 cancellation wouldn't be the end for the race. The mayor at the time, Michael Nutter, always had a sense of the race as part of the fabric of Philadelphia's community, and as such, new organization would be formed, and the race would be held in a modified format for the year 2013. It was passed off to different organizers, and it was technically no longer the same event. This time it would finish at the top of the wall, and although the race was still important to American teams, it no longer drew such a high-caliber international field as in years past. For an event that was at once sprawling and cumbersome to organize and didn't have as direct a revenue source as mass spectator ticketing, 2013 was where it became more publicly obvious than ever just how difficult this thing was to organize. Now without any of Trauner, Symes, or Casale, the race would only carry on for 4 more years before being canceled. But, as a famous sports writer once said, there's always a party near the end of the world. With the finish at the top of the wall, the party was closer than ever.
So every year, of course, you go up after the finish, you're at the podium, you do the podium stuff, you do the anti-doping stuff, and so you're hanging out on the wall for quite a while doing all that. And so these guys realized that we're stuck up there, and so they would kind of bring the party to us. So they're over there, and we're partying all around the anti-doping tent, and then we're partying over behind the podium, and they just thought it was the greatest thing.
The race, of course, wasn't what it was in the 90s and 2000s. It no longer held nationals in that era, and as such didn't attract as prestigious a field. It didn't even have the same course at the end. And there were those who mourned those changes.
They came back and they tried to run the race. It was the same race in name only. It was a different course. The prize was no prize money. It was way down. It was a completely different promotion. It's not the same race.
By that time, the international flavor of the race went away. Kind of when that appeal went away, my interest kind of waned. It was more of a draw when it was a national championship and they had the European teams there.
But even as the race diminished in its importance in the cycling world, locals still turned out. A funny sort of swap happened. The race had defined this community. It put Manayunk on the map. Now, in the waning years of the race, the community's party on the wall was probably its main draw. Certainly, without the fan elements, 2013 would have been the end. There wouldn't have been the impetus to bring it back for that year. The love for cycling built up in Manayunk over the 30 years of the race would bring it back for 4 more editions.
It really was, it was like Mardi Gras or like Oktoberfest, and it was an amazing thing to be part of. Like, the whole world came here for a week. It's our little town. I think some of the people are nostalgic for it, are nostalgic for that reason, that it was this great, moment on the world stage to show off, we really like it here.
And then there was nothing left. In 2017, the city once again could not find the sponsorship to justify the cost and canceled the race for that year. It hasn't been back. The 8th year without the Philadelphia races came and went with 2024, but the city still wears the memory of that event, although most of the locations important to the event just reverted back to everyday life. If you look down the parkway, you could maybe still imagine the finish gantry, but it never came close to being that cycling hallowed ground that it once figured to be. Other places still carry hints and whispers of the past. You can still see names of racers and legends painted on the streets if you know where to look, but it's all mostly faded now. The lingering exception is, of course, the wall. Perhaps it's fitting that the People's Hillside is where the memory is stronger than anywhere else. Filming this video took me to the wall itself several times, and in that time I came across several people riding up the wall who do it because of the race. That's kind of the magic of cycling as a sport. You can take an ordinary stretch of road and make it a landmark. It's tempting to imagine the US Road Championship years as this kind of prohibitive golden era for the race. And there is a kernel of truth in that. It is the time where the race had its highest levels of sporting competition. But it's hard to countenance that view when you see photos and hear stories from those waning years, how people still turned out to celebrate. It's an oversimplification to say that the soul of the race, as it were, was completely unchanged after the US Pro Championships left, but it's an overcorrection to say that all was lost. The race in its 90s heyday was this fundamental thing to Manayunk. Via television exposure and world-class cycling, this neighborhood left behind became one of Philadelphia's best places. But in the 10 years post-US Pro, the diminishing luster of the race didn't affect the place itself. Instead, Manayunk itself largely became the spectacle. We didn't have the world's best racing here anymore, but the community fostered in large part by the race still remained. Even 8 years after the event stopped, you'll still see traces here and there of the cycling heritage of this neighborhood. If you go to the wall, you can make the climb as well. It'll surely remind you of how hard the royalty of this sport worked and plied their trade here. But if you look around, you'll also see the remnants and references of the race itself, recording how this community was built up by this event and how it embraced the event in turn, carrying on the memory well after the race's conclusion. It's the ongoing story of a really unlikely and incredible bond between a sport and a neighborhood. That was and still is the story of the Philadelphia bike race.